Okay, so bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our conversation with Henry Mintzberg. This is the last conversation of our two-week program, and we're extremely honored to have Professor Mintzberg with us. I think from looking at his webpage that he probably has been busier on Zoom and Team and all these virtual platforms than he perhaps was in his past couple of years as teaching full-time at the Deux Hôtels faculty. So I think by now you must be a Zoom expert, Professor Mintzberg. Just in terms of introduction, although he does not need one, Henry Mintzberg is a writer and an educator. He holds the Cleghorn Chair at the Deux Hôtels Faculty of Management at McGill University. He spent his life writing and teaching about managing organizations, developing managers, and maybe more recently rebalancing society, which is certainly something that's very much in line with the theme of our summer school, which was around resilience and creativity in view, of course, of the COVID pandemic. So he holds a mechanical engineering degree and then specialized, did a PhD and a master's at the MIT School of Management. He's authored over 20 books. I'll just highlight a couple: Managers, Not MBAs, Simply Managing, Rebalancing Society, and Managing the Myths of Healthcare, which in view of what happened with the healthcare situation was incredibly prescient, because this was written years before the crisis hit us. He has a TWOG, he has a website, he's co-founded the International Masters Program for Managers, the International Masters for Health Leadership. He, of course, has numerous awards, the Order of Canada, l'Ordre National du Québec. He was the first person from a management faculty to be appointed to the Royal Society of Canada, and he is also in the top group of 50 thinkers around the world. He's comfortably sitting in his house in the Laurentians. I hope it's not as hot as it is here in Montreal. So Professor Mintzberg, we're really grateful that you joined us, and we look forward to our conversation with you. So I'm going to pass the floor to my two colleagues and to you. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. It's cool in the basement. And just to add one, Bedtime Stories for Managers is my latest book, and it's the most fun.
Okay, thanks so much, Professor Mintzberg. In 2014, you wrote this beautiful pamphlet called Rebalancing Society, and we were extremely lucky. 3 years ago, you were the keynote speaker of a summer school, Mosaic Summer School, and we discussed a lot and go in depth about how to rebalance society. Of course, with the coronavirus, society needs to be even more rebalanced. So in a short question, what would be the guidelines for rebalancing society now? If you have to, I will not say rewrite the book, but what would you add about rebalancing society?
Okay, good question. In 3 years, we'll do this again, and we'll hopefully do this in a more balanced society. We'll wait and see. You know, I'm not sure I would change much in the book. What I would do, I mean, I've written other things that are on the website, on the cover of the book on my homepage, mintzberg.org. People can see what I've done since, but it's just elaborating and so on. Maybe two things to highlight. One is that we need to see that framework in the light of the pandemic. And it seems to me, you know, you see what you believe. You know, people say, I'll believe it when I see it, but we see it when we believe it. And I look at the world through the lens of three sectors: the public sector, the private sector, and what I call the plural sector. The plural sector meaning civil society, community, organizations that are neither business nor government, and of which there are huge, huge numbers. And that leg is needed for balance. The societies, the countries that are doing best, it seems to me, have that balance. And the way I use the framework now is to say that in a crisis like this, we look to governments to protect us. We look to businesses to supply us. with equipment and you know, and masks and all kinds of other things. And we look to communities, to our communities to engage us. And those three elements are absolutely critical in a pandemic, just like they're critical in normal times. And if you look at the countries that are doing best, maybe Denmark, New Zealand, I think Canada's doing badly, relatively speaking, they exhibit that balance. If you look at the countries that are doing worst, okay, the big three, to my mind, the United States, Brazil, and Britain. You could include Russia, obviously, but Britain, China not, for different reasons, but Britain. What you find is a disparaging of the public sector, an obsession with the private sector, and a diminution or reduction in influence of the plural or community sector. So I think the framework applies quite well and helps to explain what's going on. China is a bit of an exception because in crisis, sometimes you look to leadership, and unlike those three countries, the leadership in China seems to have done some of the right things, very aggressively, but you know, sometimes that kind of aggression can work in your favor. If you're locking people down, in the United States, it's please don't go out, and in China, it's you the hell are not going out. There are benefits to that temporarily.
Good,
Oh, I wanted to say something else in more direct response to your question. One of the big elements I've added and thought about since is Reformation. But it seems to me that society's changed the way Luther changed religion or society in the 16th century from the ground up. Luther was a monk. Luther was nobody special. He was angry at the Pope. He nailed these 95 Theses to the door of a church. Big deal. Talk about going viral. His students saw it and, unbeknownst to him, used the new media technology called the printing press to get it around within weeks, and it became viral. They didn't need electronic viral, they used the printing press. And it spread incredibly quickly because people were so fed up with the corruption in the church and associated with the church that they acted. And people are getting fed up with our corruption. So maybe the time's right.
I just ask you about, you mentioned the countries that succeeded in balancing the society, like Denmark and the other, countries that, let's say, failed. What is your feeling about Canada?
Well, it's interesting. You know, Canada is one of the few relatively balanced countries. It's not the most balanced. I would say Denmark or New Zealand. It's interesting that if you look at the Economist list of what they call full democracies, there's, I think, 21 countries on the latest list of full democracies. That follows flawed democracies and hybrids and non-democracies and so on. But there's 21 on that list. They're almost all small, almost all, by all the Scandinavian countries, New Zealand, you know, and so on and so forth. The first large country, middle-sized country, is Canada, which I think is around number 8. The biggest one on the list, I think, is Germany. But so that's not a measure of balance, that's a measure of democracy, but I think that correlates closely with balance. The United States is not on the top 21. Britain is, although I frankly don't see why anymore. Maybe it's because The Economist does it, I don't know. And Canada, interesting in Canada is that Quebec has the strongest sense of community of the whole country. The sense of community in Quebec is extremely strong. It's strong elsewhere. It's strong across the country. It used to be strong in the United States, but it's been so depreciated. But it's strong. Canada certainly has balance between public and private. Quebec even more so, sometimes to its discredit, because governments in Quebec act. Barrette unfortunately. He had much too much influence. but government is strong in Quebec. Government is strong in all of Canada, and business is strong. We don't lack for strong private sector forces. We just constrain them much more than the Americans or the British do. So Canada and Quebec especially are well poised, I think.
May I come back to one of the three pillars of the Balancing Society, which is the plural sector, on which I think a lot of the plural sector.
Wait, can I interrupt? Your voice doesn't come through that clearly to me.
Okay.
Is it possible to get closer to the mic or something? Because it's not as strong as I think it could be. Is there a way to do it?
Could I try now? Is it better now?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. My question is about the plural sector, the sector where you have the communities, the citizen, and so on. How these plural sectors can be organized? Can he organize his voice or its voice to be understood by the government and the private companies? What are the possibilities of connecting all these informal voices to be listened by the government and the private sectors?
Yeah, it's well put, I think, all these informal voices. Let me tell you something. I've been to Davos a couple of times, 2-3 times. I've been to the World Social Forum, which was held in Montreal once. Davos is organized, and the private sector knows how to organize to get things done. Competing businesses will happily work together, like the oil companies or whoever, if they want to get something done. The plural sector is the famous McGill humorist Stephen Leacock said he raced out of his house, leaped on his horse, and rode off in all directions. The plural sector is always riding off in all directions and always undermining each other. Anybody to your left is a communist and anybody to your right is a fascist, and everybody's sort of disputing with each other. The plural sector has to get its collective act together. So when you say, all those informal voices have to speak with one voice. My hope is that an issue like Balancing Society, I maintain that what they have in common, when I talk plural sector, I'm obviously not talking about a large part of the plural sector, the very right wing. The National Rifle Association is part of the plural sector. The John Birch Society was part of the plural sector. They're community organizations, but I'm talking about organizations like Greenpeace or like Médecins Sans Frontières or like Amnesty International. I maintain they all have common cause, namely what's driving what they're dealing with. So if Médecins Sans Frontières is dealing with war and Amnesty International is dealing with justice and Greenpeace is dealing with environment, it's the imbalance in society that's causing those problems. The reason we have global warming is because personally, as well as business, we're all part of this, not just business. We're all part of it. We all pollute, we all waste, we all cause, it's individualism. Individualism and business interests are the same in a way, self-interest. And self-interest is driving the pollution, just as business interests, which reflect self-interest, are driving the pollution. So we really have to sort of recognize that and come back from the brink of, look what's going on in the United States today is hyper-individualism. Nobody is going to tell me to put on a mask. I have every right to infect other people by not wearing a mask. I mean, that's what they're saying, right? Well, my response to the National Rifle Association is, would I, as an American citizen, have the right to bear nuclear arms? After all, Americans' Second Amendment, they have the right to bear arms. Do they have the right to bear nuclear arms? And if not, then where do you draw the line? Do they have right to bear cluster bombs? Where do you draw the line? I draw the line between knives and guns because you can't control knives. Where do they want to draw the line? Certainly not beyond nuclear bombs. So it's this hyper-individuality that's destroying the United States and Britain as well. These are the two liberal democracies that are no longer liberal, and they're less and less democratic.
Professor Mintzberg, thank you so much. You dedicated one part of your career to the study of the healthcare system.
Yeah.
So what can you say today about it? How can we be more prepared in terms of the relationship of this healthcare ecosystem with the rest of society?
You know, in the book called Managing the Myths of Healthcare, I think the most important statement in the book is what I call the great strength and the debilitating weakness of modern medicine, okay? The great strength, medicine is in the business of putting us into their categories, okay? That's what medicine does. I present myself, I have a pain in my bottom right, they feel around, great, it's an appendectomy, it's an appendix problem, we know exactly how to deal with it. And they're amazing. I mean, I've had open heart surgery, you know, blocked artery, get them into open heart surgery, amazing. I've not felt anything in my heart for 5 years at all. I mean, personally, but not physically. So it's amazing, absolutely amazing when the categories work. The great weakness of medicine is when the categories don't work, either because we have a disease that they don't, really an illness that they haven't defined as a disease, like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, which they don't know what it's about, a lot of autoimmune diseases, and so on. So you're lost in the system, or you have multiple conditions because you're geriatric, then which order do we do them in? Or you got to get beneath the categories because treating you as a patient is not sufficient when you're not treated as a person. If you're treated as a person, you will react better to the treatment. So the categories can get in the way. Now, when they're doing the appendectomy, believe me, I don't say cut a little lower, please. You know, I don't look for bedside manner, okay? Because I'm out cold anyway. But if it's a psychiatric problem or whatever, then the person is just far more important than the patient. But the category is patient. We're a patient, you know. I've been having a problem for 3 months because I've been trying to convey a message about pandemic through both newspaper editors and especially epidemiologists who totally reject what I'm saying, totally reject it. And that is a finding in Italy that the virus might be carried in polluted air. It's not that anything is proven, it's just that please entertain the possibility. But you know what? The WHO, the World Health Organization, has one category. It has one category. I call it level 1 transmission. It's transmission, it's proximate transmission. It's transmission through people who are near me or near whoever, I don't know this, but near whoever is infected. They resisted what's called asymptomatic transmission, people who don't show signs. First they resisted that, now they've given in on this. Then they've rejected the aerosol explanation that it carries farther than 2-3 meters in air. Now they're gonna have to give up on that. I call it a blind spot. Now they're gonna have to give up on that blind spot. And I think pollution is the third blind spot, which is that if we recognize the role that pollution, especially smoke, there's lots of interesting things about smoke in hog plants that smoke ham, in Chinese markets that smoke ducks. Smoke seems to be a factor, but you can't get through. They're absolutely, utterly blocked, including an ex-student of mine who's at the WHO, who we correspond with. They're absolutely blocked. And this is the failing of medicine. The problem with epidemiology, I think, just as the problem with economics, is that they deal in generalities, they deal in abstractions, they deal in populations. You know, somebody said an economist is somebody who never met a real person, but once had one described to him. You might be able to say that about epidemiologists because they're always working in aggregates, not on the ground. There are some, obviously, but most are not. And they resist a certain kind of thinking that is critically important for this pandemic. So they're in the way in that respect. What they're doing is absolutely necessary. All the locking down, masks, keeping your distance, all of that is absolutely necessary. It's not sufficient.
Professor Mintzberg, in your very inspiring book about managing the rhythm of healthcare, you wrote this sentence I like a lot, which is care, cure, control, and community have to work together within healthcare institutions and across them to deliver quantity, quality, and equality seamlessly. Could you comment on that? Could you comment a little bit on that?
Yeah. You know, I worked with a colleague once named Sholem Globman. We did a matrix on care and cure, and sort of with management, and we said physicians are about cure, or at least they're about treatment. Nurses are largely about care, partly treatment, but largely about care. Managers are about control, and the board is about community. The trouble is each of them works in their own silos. So you got the physicians working in their silo, the nurses working in their silos, the managers working in their silos, and the board trying to somehow, and the volunteers trying somehow to get through all this. Healthcare works when they work together across care, cure, control, and community. That's when healthcare works best. But again, we've got these narrow silos.
Professor Mintzberg, you still are a pillar of strategy education, management education. Somehow we could also interpret this crisis as a failure of management. And you were mentioning reformation. So what kind of reformation would we need in the training and education of managers today in order to be better prepared for the coming crisis?
Well, besides your own course, which you're doing right now, and our course, the International Masters for Health Management, it's a hugely successful, very popular course. And the training is totally different. What we do is we have people work together in groups, and we have them focus not on other people's theory, other people's cases, but on their own experience. And so they learn from each other's experience, which I'm sure they're doing in your group as well. And that's the most powerful part of the teaching. That's a first step. A second step is that we end up with people in managerial positions who are abhorrent. I mean, would you invite Trump to your house for dinner? Would you invite Bolsonaro to your house for dinner? I think I might invite Johnson to my house for dinner because he's such a clown. But you know, the big three, you know, or Putin, what a nice guy. I never saw this guy smile in his entire life. It's like Trump's wife. He never, ever smile. Is this the kind of people you want leading yourself? How do you get decent leaders? In business or any organization, I'm not one for easy prescriptions, but I'll tell you how I think we get much better leadership. We give voice to the people who have experienced the management of the candidates. In other words, if 4 people are running for either factory foreman or chief executive of a big company or president of the United States, in a way, you get the people who have worked for them to comment, okay? Because they know, if I maintain, if you have to know people's faults. You can't just appoint people for their strengths. You have to point them for their faults to make sure that won't get in the way. So how do you know people's faults? Well, there's only 2 ways. I think you either work for them or you marry them. Okay. Now you can't ask the wives or the husbands because they're biased, and you can't ask the ex-wives or the ex-husbands because they're even more biased. You can ask the people who worked for them, and you could save so much grief if you got the word from the people who experienced the management. Don't ever appoint a manager without finding out how they manage. And the only people who can really tell you that are the ones who are managed by them.
Thank you. Okay. Professor Mintzberg, in recent writings, you wrote about this let's say, very important declaration of interdependence. Could you comment on this?
Yeah, you know, we held in this house, we held a workshop, 9 of us, because we had Rebalancing Society and what's next. And so I brought 9 people from different countries together, a few Americans, a few Canadians, a Dane, somebody from Iran, and so on. We brought them together and brainstormed about what to do, how to carry this forward. The results are all on my homepage where, you know, on the cover of Rebalancing Society, where I show a table of different ways to intervene and so on. And the declaration is on there, mintzberg.org, and you see it as soon as you see the cover of Rebalancing Society. One guy during that workshop kept saying, we must look at the Declaration of Independence. We must look at the Declaration of Independence. We must look at that. We must look at that. Finally, at the end, we said, okay, we'll look at it. On the way home, 2 of us in the car, one guy was sitting in back reading the Declaration of Independence on his phone, and I was driving. And together, we started going through the clauses. For example, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So we came up with, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created dependent on each other, our earth and its climate. And it went on like that. So we kind of paraphrased in part and wrote sort of this declaration in the declaration of our interdependence. The reason we called it that is partly because there's about 10 declarations of interdependence already. David Suzuki, one on the environment, and so on. So we called it the Declaration of Our Interdependence. And anybody can go find it on my website or go under that title, and you can sign. And it's just a statement of what we could be doing. And it's kind of partly inspired in a way, I think, by Luther, in a way, who put those 95 theses on the wall of the church and changed the world.
So if we assess this declaration of interdependence, again, for leaders in practice, what would it mean?
For leaders in practice, I think it just takes us back to balance, basically. You know, the purpose, and it emphasizes the point that change doesn't necessarily come from the top. Yes, if you're an entrepreneur who's created and thought through the business, if you're Steve Jobs, you're going to be hugely responsible for setting direction because you got the whole thing in your head. But if you're running an established organization, whether it's a government organization or a business organization or a community organization, you have to encourage what I call communityship, so that people all over the organization will come up with ideas for improving it and changing it. That's your role. Your role is not just to, or especially to, we're so loaded with narcissism. You know, I read yesterday about, you know, the pay scales of chief executives. Any chief executive who accepts to be paid hundreds of times as much as the workers is not a leader, period. Because the message is, I'm hundreds of times more important than anybody in this business. You know what? These people don't have the time to spend that money. The signal they should be sending is, we're all in this together. We're all working together. And therefore my pay is the most important indication of this. Sure, pay me more because I've had more experience and all that, but not what we're doing now. It's absolutely obscene. So I'm waiting for chief executives. I wrote a letter in my book, Bedtime Stories for Managers. I have a letter from a chief executive to the board who says, please cut my salary. I can't possibly manage this company as I believe I should by being paid so much.
In a very...
What I'm saying is we need leadership. Let's stop talking about leadership. I'm so full of leadership, leadership, leadership. The word leadership implies an individual. We need communityship. So let's look at leadership as embedded in communityship. Everybody needs to be a leader, starting with the chief executives who need to act in a way that's generous and opening instead of narcissistic. It's sick. It's absolutely sick.
In the Harvard Business Review article, just after the financial crisis, you said, you pinpointed the excess of leadership as a cause maybe of the failure of the system. And you argue to balance leadership and communityship, as you just said.
Right.
Do you think that companies has listened to your advices since then? Do you see companies that really equilibrate leadership and communityship? Do you have examples, or do you think there is a progress in our industrial system in this domain?
You know, I can only talk for companies I've been in, you know, and I can only talk where I've been in enough to get a feel for things. When I walk into a place that has it, it just hits me in the face. So I walked in, it's another story in the book, but I walked into a big hotel in England. The minute you enter, you can tell that there's a feeling, everybody is smiling, happy, helpful. You know, I'm not talking about greeters at Walmart. I'm talking about people who are just, you know, in it. And so you can smell that kind of attitude. Now, somebody just wrote to me. I get the most charming letters sometimes. I mean, I read everything. I shouldn't say this, I get too many, but I read what I get because occasionally it's just a wonderfully charming letter. This guy writes to me, he's a consultant in California, a successful entrepreneur, and he became a consultant, and he consults with a lot of the big IT companies. I think he mentioned some ones like Google, and I'm not sure he mentioned Apple, but a number of them. And he said that he was hugely influenced by my view of strategy and crafting strategy and my view of the management process. What he was implying, and I don't want to take this too far without him telling me much more, what he was implying is that my writing might have had a big influence on those California companies. That's an indirect thing, and I don't know. I'd be delighted if it's true. He's certainly saying that he has had a big influence, been influenced by it, and that has influenced his consulting. That much I know.
So we have a challenge to integrate communityship to organizations by design, which is actually a huge challenge. But you used earlier one word that doesn't really resonate with what capitalism is about. You talked about generosity. So how can we integrate this dimension of generosity to what organizations are today?
Well, and no capitalist should, or few capitalists can have trouble with the concept of generosity. Do you mean to say that, what's his name at Microsoft, Bill Gates, do you mean to say that Bill Gates doesn't understand generosity? He understands, he counting strictly in money terms, he's been the most generous human being who ever lived. So they understand generosity perfectly well. When an economist says to me that there's no such a thing as generosity, or there's no such a thing as, I forget how they put it, but it's all about greed. My response is, what kind of mother did you have? If you don't think generosity exists, I wonder what kind of mother you have. We're all built around generosity just as much as we're built around self-interest. And so I don't buy that at all. And I have friends who are entrepreneurs who are tremendously generous people. I don't mean just giving money away. I mean, they're just responsive to people. You know, any entrepreneur who sees the employees as part of his or her family is expressing generosity, and so many do. You know, the guy who created Ricard in France, the pastis company, during the war, they took all the alcohol He was in the south of France. They took all the alcohol that they needed for the war effort to run vehicles. And so his whole pastis company was stopped. You know what he did? He came up with the idea of growing rice in the, what's called the Delta, the Delta of the Rhone River, forget the name.
Camargue.
The Camargue. He came up with the idea of growing rice, and France became self-sufficient in rice because he was trying to maintain the employment of his people. So don't tell me about the generosity or lack of generosity of entrepreneurs. Most of them, there are all kinds of monster entrepreneurs. There are monster everybody, but many entrepreneurs are hugely generous. The economists are the stupid ones, and I say that without any hesitation at all. The mainstream economists who say there's no such a thing as generosity, they're the stupid ones.
Thank you.
We have a question about the role of technology on sometimes disbalancing society. For instance, artificial intelligence is today shocking and disbalancing society. How could we react or manage or mitigate the use of technology to improve the balancing of society?
But you know, any technology has two sides to it, right? I mean, look at what the car has done. You know, it's been amazing. All right, so it kills 40,000 people a year in the United States. Okay, well, every technology is a double-edged sword, okay? I think Zoom has shown something really, really interesting about technology, because here we are, we're three people, we're having quite an intimate conversation. I can see you, you can see, if you've got me on the whole screen, you can see everything I'm doing, every movement, everything. Okay, you couldn't see that. Even if I was in your class, which normally we would do with 50 people there, you wouldn't be able to see me as well as you do now. We couldn't have an intimate conversation. If somebody in the class was asking me a question, that person and I would be interacting really close. So the technology, much to my own surprise, because I've always been suspicious of information technologies, has actually enhanced communication in a certain respect. And clearly, we couldn't do this without Zoom during the pandemic.
We have a very personal question, if we may. What is your personal takeaway from the pandemic, from the situation of the pandemic, on you, I would say, on a personal view?
It's, you know, I am one to talk from experience. I believe hugely in experience. My original research, my doctoral thesis, was on studying managers, and it was seeing what they did in their offices that really influenced me. What's been my experience here? You know what? I used to work 75% at home. Now I work 100% at home. I used to go into the office for meetings. Now I do Zoom calls. We don't go to stores, but I'm not a keen shopper. But up here, we're getting 24-hour delivery on all groceries, and Amazon is like quick. So I don't have to go searching for something in a hardware store. I go on Amazon and I have it at my door a couple of days later. I mean, it's mind-blowing. So it sounds callous to say I haven't suffered. Mercifully, nobody close has been sick, seriously ill. So it seems to me that maybe what it's done is opened up so many possibilities, because we can see all kinds of different ways of doing things. I just sent something in, which I've sent in for the 100th time, maybe now it'll get published, about the pandemic and the fact that we're you know, this blockage about how we can change things, and we could be opening ourselves up if we you know, the new normal. The danger is that the new normal is not a new normal at all. The preferred new normal is to go straight back to the old normal. If pollution is a factor, that means we bring back a second wave. okay? So the new normal is wake up. If it's true, we've got to stop polluting. And it's not that hard, actually. And besides, we had to do it for years anyway. We have to stop it or we're going to burn ourselves out of this planet. It's up here. The temperature up here today is unheard of. It's in the well into the 30s. We never had temperatures like that up here. So you know, if we wake up to a real new normal, that could be a huge benefit from this horrible situation. What we are realizing is that leadership matters. Trump and Johnson and Bolsonaro almost single-handedly are responsible for tens of thousands of deaths in their own country. All three of them. All three of them. It's not coincidental that those three countries are leading the world, talk about leadership, are leading the world in deaths and infections. And they all denied it. They're all acting stupidly. They're all reopening everything with no thought and no evidence about the safety of that. They should all be charged with manslaughter. I think the level of irresponsibility of those three men is mind-blowing.
Echoing your last comment, we have a question from the audience asking if the pandemic is creating more inequity, more gaps between people.
I'll let my daughter answer that indirectly because she wants to do a little op-ed piece with me on the fact that it's the opposite. That in fact, what this has brought to the fore are people at the base of the organization, this whole idea of up and down and top management and middle management. It's brought out the importance of people at the base of the organization. In a certain respect, it's been leveling. I think the Premier of Quebec, I hope, has learned that message, that you know, he's not a bad guy, but trying to do, you know, knowing more, being smarter in Quebec City when you're disconnected from everything, keeping Joanne Lieu out of the discussion when she ran Doctors Without Borders, a Quebecoise who ran Doctors Without Borders for 8 years worldwide, and not involving her when she had that experience. I hope that message is getting through. Joanne was on the ground. She was a leader in Médecins Sans Frontières on the ground. She was on the ground. She had worked on the ground for years and years and years. And I hope our Premier has got the message that he'll be smarter if he realizes that other people are smarter, that other people know more. And his job is to bring that out and use it and not act like Barrett did by destroying our healthcare system.
So Professor Mintzberg, maybe we're getting to the end of this conversation. Would you have one last message to share about this specific moment in time and about maybe what we should or could learn about it?
Well, you know, it's very personal too. People are letting their guard down. The feeling more and more seems to be, well, thank God that's over. It's not over. It's not over. Clearly in some places like the Southwest United States, Brazil, and so on, it's not over at all. But even where it looks like it's over around here, it's not over. And we can't let our guard down. And our guard involves both what we're being told about proximate transmission. Yes, wear masks. Yes, keep your distance, and so on and so forth. But also about atmospheric transmission. Watch out for any kind of pollutant, whether it's smog in the air or smoke in a hog factory. Watch out for any pollutant that might carry the virus.
Thank you, Professor Mintzberg. I think you deserve a big applaud. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hopefully we'll meet again soon and hopefully in real life.
Did you record it at all?
Yes, we did.
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Yes.
We could
No,
share-
I would put it up on YouTube. I think it's so direct and it seems to capture things so well. I would try and get it up on YouTube. I think.
With great pleasure.
And my assistant is setting up a kind of place for my stuff on YouTube. I think it came out really well.
Thank you.
Wonderful. We
Thank
will
you for the
follow up with
question.
you.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's really good. Keep well.
Keep well. Thank you so much.
Bye. I think this is better. It's more democratic than this.
Thank you. We see you. Thank you so much again.
Bye. Bye.